All right. All right. So, and then share my screen. Okay. So I guess first of all, I'm going to be asking you guys to, if you can, uh, kind of respond in the chat, and just let me know, or I'm going to ask some questions, respond in the chat, and you can send these directly to me, just because I don't want anyone to be ashamed of their answers, and I don't think anyone should be anyways, but I don't want anyone to be afraid at all. And then also, if there's some misconceptions that I can see that are constantly coming in through the chat, that I can kind of go over them and try to direct or help you guys realize why something might be wrong. Um, and then also, if you want to do a multi-line comment, because there might be some times where you want to do multiple lines and separate it, you can use the shift return. And this won't actually send your message, because usually if you press return, it'll send your message, and you don't always want that. Okay, so yeah, we can just move on. Yeah, so we're going to start off by going over some file system navigation. So in the last lesson, I had a lot of people kind of confused on like what I don't know if you guys remember, but the CD project name does, or whatever you're going to CD into. So I really just kind of wanted to go over this today. CD is going to be one of the command line tools. So like you're going to use it in your Windows PowerShell or in your Mac terminal, things like that. And it allows you to change the folder that your terminal is operating in. So we'll elaborate on this more. So this is just an example file system. So this is going to be something like, imagine the parent is the desktop, and the parent is your desktop folder. And on your desktop, you're going to have a bunch of folders, right? And those folders are going to have some folders and some files. So if you were really to draw this out, it would look like some sort of a tree. Does Yeah, so I hope this is clear. So like imagine your parent is your desktop, let's say, and then all the folders are the folders on your desktop, and then everything inside of them is linked by these lines. So like, for example, folder 3 contains folder 2, folder 4 contains folder 5, etc. And so yeah, CD is going to be used to change directory. So I can actually show an example right after this, after I explain. So yeah, CD is going to be changing directory. So when you're in your terminal, whenever you have or your PowerShell, whenever you have a window open, it's going to be located inside of some directory, wherever it starts. So usually when you open it up for the first time, it's going to be in your home directory, your user directory. So it's like basically how it works is your user directory holds everything: your desktop directory, your downloads directory, your documents directory. I'm sure you guys have all seen these when you're just navigating through your computer. So that's where your terminal is normally going to start, or your PowerShell. So then pretty much if you want your terminal to change directories, you have to use the CD command to do so. And the syntax for CD is, if I'm a parent, so let's say I'm in the desktop and I have a folder on my desktop. I'm the terminal. So I'm on the desktop right now and I want to change into one of the folders that's on my desktop. Then I would do CD and then that folder name. And then now the terminal is operating in that folder. So this is just different than just being your VS Code and kind of clicking around. If I pull that up right now. So if we look in my VS Code, as I'm in the terminal for it, we can see that right now, I'm just going to click on a file in here. Right now, we can see this example div. So that means that my terminal is located in this example div folder. Even though I'm not clicking on the example div folder right now, it just means that my terminal is located there. And this is going to be important when we're trying to execute files that are in our direct folder. So it's really good to have the understanding of how it works. So I basically made this example. So sorry, I'm going to move this around. Okay. So I have this folder on my desktop. I don't know if you guys can see in the bottom corner. It's just called File Nav Practice. So if I open this up, I'm going to have 4 folders, kind of like the example that I just showed. If I go back, kind of like this one. So my desktop is the parent, or sorry, my File Nav Practice right here is going to be my parent. And then that thing has folders inside of it. And then those folders also have things inside of them if I open them up. So yeah, we see there's a couple files in these. This folder 3 doesn't have a file in it. But if I want to navigate around this, right now, this squiggly line, I'm on Mac. Sorry, Windows users. I couldn't exactly show you what it looks like on yours. But that means that I'm in my home directory. So I need to change directory into my desktop. So now I'm in my desktop, as we can see here. And then I can change directory into my file nav practice. Okay. So now that I'm in my file nav practice, we can change into only the direct folders that are inside of it. So if I want to change into folder 1, then I have to do cd fold 1. Is this clear to everybody? Do we see how it's kind of working? Okay, perfect. All right, so I want you guys to send this in the chat if you can. If we are in the parent directory, then what command would I run in my terminal to change to folder 3? If you could just send me a direct message or you want to do it in the main chat, then just let me know. Perfect, perfect. I'm getting a lot of CD folder 3s. Only thing is, some of them I'm seeing a little capitalization mistakes. So we just got to make sure that our CD is lowercase for both of the letters. That's really important, just for the syntax. And then also that our file name is exactly correct. So since this is folder 3 with a capital F, no space, it has to be exactly that, or else it's not going to know what you're talking about. But yeah, everybody gets the concept. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. So now we are in folder 3. How do we get back to parent? Anyone know? Okay. I'm getting a few good answers in chat. Looks like you guys have done some file system navigation before. And yeah, basically the answer is going to be cd dot dot. And I'm going to go ahead and explain this in the next step. This is going to be when you want to go from your child directory to its parent. And there's also another one called dot, and that just means my own directory, the directory that we're in right now. So if my terminal is in the child and I want to go back to parent, then I'd run cd dot dot to get into that file. Um, and then yeah, so this can be multiple lines of code, or if you know how to do it in one, that's great. But I want to see in the chat, how do we get from folder 1 in the bottom left right here all the way to folder 5? Now this can be multiple lines, and then yeah, just let me know in the chat. So yeah, if you want to do multiple lines, you can do shift return, so then it doesn't actually send your message. It just, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, for sure. Ask away.
Does cd dot dot, you said it brings you to the parent. Does that mean like the immediate, like
Yes.
here
Yes,
above, or the
exactly.
ultimate parent, like parent?
Yeah, so realistically, the only like full parent there's going to be is the root. And that's not going to be until like way higher, even past your user. So like, for me, I log into my MacBook and I have a user named Ryan, right? So that's going to be a directory right there. That's going to be way behind that directory. So that's going to be the ultimate parent. This example was just to kind of show the relationship. But yes, if I'm in folder 1, this folder 1 in the bottom left, and I do cd dot dot, cd space dot dot, then that will just bring me to my immediate parent. I shouldn't have used the word parent right here, but I just did that. But yeah, it'll just bring you one up. So this is just a little bit of navigating the file system. Okay, yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of great answers in here. Um, Pretty much, it would be like this. So if you're doing it in multiple lines, I don't know. Wait, can you guys let me know? Can you guys see my cursor?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So pretty much we start in our folder one in the bottom left. Now, if we do cd dot dot, we trace this line back and we go to its parent, and then we do cd dot dot, so that it goes to its parent. So now we're in parent directory. Now, since we're in parent, we can access these four folders: folder one, folder two, folder three, folder four. We can't directly access the child without using a longer path, but we're not going to go over that too much yet. And then, yeah, so we're going to do cd into folder four, and then cd into folder five. Now, or you can do this all in one step. So you can do this by using the backslash in order to specify a full path. So if I'm in a folder, for example, if I'm in folder one, dot dot is its parent, right? But if we did dot dot slash dot dot, that means that we go to our parent, and then from that we go to its parent, because the slash means we're now in the new directory. So another example would be if we're in folder one in the bottom left. If we did folder one and then we did dot dot, and then let's say this file was a folder, right? If we did folder one and then dot dot slash folder two, which would be right here, you could also access it that way. That's not going to be super needed because you can do it all in this one step, but it's good to understand paths. So I don't have this formally asked, but just to kind of test your guys' understanding, if we were in the parent directory and I wanted to go to folder five in one step, how would we do so? In one command. Perfect, perfect. Yep, I'm seeing a lot come through. Looks great. So yeah, it'd just be cd and then folder four slash folder five. And that just gets us from parent directly to folder five. It just skips, but you have to include folder four first, just so we know to look in that directory. And then, yeah, what Sina just said, I can go through it now. You can use tab when you're halfway done typing something to not have to finish typing. So I'm just going to extend this all right here just so you all can see it. Yeah, so right now I'm in my file nav practice. And so if I wanted to go to, let's say, the folder one inside of my folder one, so since I'm in file nav practice, I can only access these four folders in one step. Like I couldn't go to folder one without using the backslash for a path, or folder slash, or forward slash, I mean, sorry. So then if I wanted to go to fold one, I would have to do it like this. And then now we'd be in the lower level fold one. If I want to go up one to its parent, which is fold one, you can do cd dot dot. But yeah, these are just some examples of navigating around. And so this really ties in when this is really important to be in the right directory when we are starting our React app, because I know this is a big confusion for a lot of people. But I just kind of wanted to go over this. So we have the example from our project. You can only run npm start from the folder that you made when you ran npx create React app. So I'll go into my example div folder, let's say. So if I'm not in my example div folder, I'm just in my example code folder, which holds a couple React projects, right? If I'm not in that and I try to run npm start, then I'll get this error saying that it couldn't read the package, blah, blah, blah. This is related to npm not being able to find a file. This is just because I'm in the wrong directory. Now, I know the project directory that I created by using npx create React app is the example div. So if I want to do that, then I do cd example div, and I just use tab to kind of have it finish it for me. And then now we can run npm start inside of that. And then hopefully it should open up my website. Yes, it does. This is in a later example that we will be going over later, but yeah. So we just want to make sure that we're in the correct directory because this can cause a lot of confusion. Yeah. And then, yeah, this is the example from our project. So you have your user directory. I know this is very ugly. I drew this on Notability and my handwriting's horrible. Don't judge me. Uh, the user directory is just like I said on my MacBook, it's my Ryan directory. And then we have desktop, documents, downloads, a bunch of other stuff. That's not really that important right now. So what we would have done is we would have gone to our desktop and made a folder on our desktop, right? Then, so we made our folder on our desktop. So this is the folder on our desktop. Now we used npx create React app, which created another folder inside of the folder that you made. So then in order to be able to run npm start in the correct one, we had to do cd project name, which just got us into the right directory so that we could run npm start and it wouldn't get all messed up, give you a bunch of errors, make you want to go crazy. So yeah, is there any questions? I know we've gone through a few examples. Is there any questions on how CD works? If you're not fully understanding the whole path notation, yeah, anything? You can also direct message me if you don't want to say it out loud. Don't hesitate. We're here to help.
We want to see our current working directory. Would it be like, just PWD?
Yeah, so let me see. Honestly, I forget because I barely even use it. Yeah, so it is. So
Yeah, honestly, it's just like, well, actually, no, like, I know like some shell prompts that already like tell you your current working directory.
mhm.
Like, especially
Yeah,
if like you use like Nano as a text editor, like it already says it for you, pretty much.
yeah. So a lot of things will actually tell you exactly where you're at. On Mac, at least, it uses the little tilde right here to say that you're in your home directory, which just means your user directory. So yeah, we can see here that the full path of where I'm at is users or slash users slash Ryan Carney. And then yeah, so this is just my home directory. And then if I change to desktop, we can now see that uh, my working directory is just users slash Ryan Carney slash desktop. And then, yeah, I think you guys get the gist. And there's also one more thing that I wanted to go over. It's just ls. And this is very helpful for knowing where you're at as well if you don't want to use PWD, print working directory. So pretty much ls just tells you the files or directories that are located directly in your folder. So it works a little bit different with the Windows PowerShell and Linux or Mac because pretty much if you are on Mac, it just tells you the names of the files and folders if you just run ls. However, I believe this is correct on Windows PowerShell. It actually does an automatic ls-l, which tells you a little bit more information. That's not that important right now. But yeah, so if I'm in my
Right.
file, yeah, what's up?
I think in Windows is dir, so you do dir.
So here's the thing: if you're in Windows PowerShell, it can use ls, and it actually tells you it. At least this from what I've tried. However, if you're on Windows command prompt, it uses dir.
Yeah.
So it's just two different things. But I know PowerShell is on every Windows device, and I think it uses more Linux like syntax, I guess I'd say. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you have a win,
So I think it's a difference between the bash and the CMD. So if you use CMD, it's not a bash. That's why you have to use dir. But the what's called PowerShell is basically bash.
yeah,
And that's when ls works, basically, because it's Linux based. But yeah, anyways.
yeah. Well, thank you for the note. Yeah, so that's a very important point because on Windows you can either use the command prompt, which you were saying, which is CMD, or PowerShell. I'm sure you guys have seen it on the VS Code terminal that I was showing you guys. It'll say PowerShell, or if you just used PowerShell before, And in that one, you can use this syntax that I'm teaching you about, because it has a little bit more of a Linux style to it. So back to the ls example. Thank you, Sina, by the way, for mentioning that. It was an important point. If I want to change into my file nav practice, which, as a reminder, looks like this. Basically, I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think that ls, if I do ls right now, what do you guys think it will return? Yeah, so I'm glad you guys are getting the gist. Basically, it just, like a lot of you said in the chat, it'll just return folders 1 through 4. So this is just because they are directly in my file nav practice directory. So if it's not going to show anything like fold 1, like inside of fold 1, probably should change this name. I'm just going to change that now because, yeah, we'll just go fold 5. Okay. It's not going to show fold 5 because it only shows the direct children that are in our directory. And then if I was to change into fold 1, then as you guys would assume, it's going to show file 1 and fold 5. And that's just because it only shows direct children. All right. So any questions on ls? Oh, I guess I should show ls-l. Now, this is what you're probably going to see or something like this if you're on Windows PowerShell. So this just gives you a little bit more data. A lot of this isn't that important. One thing that it does tell you, though, that is really easy to recognize is if we see right in this, if we see right here, if you see what I'm highlighting, the D or the dash right here, basically, if the first digit or whatever you want to say of the line is a dash, it means that this is a file. And then if it's a D, it means that it's a directory. So that's just a little bit more information that ls-l gives you. And then, like said in the chat, you can also use ls-la or ls-a, and it shows you any hidden folders. These hidden folders are just typically ones that start with a dot. There's a couple in a lot of project directories. But yeah, that's not going to be too important for what we're doing. But thank you for the mention. Okay. All right, yeah. So just one more practice. What will be the output of ls while in folder 3? Perfect. Yeah, it's gonna be ls, or sorry, it's gonna be folder 2. And then I just saw, I think it is ls dash la, not ls dash a. So ls dash a actually will tell you all the hidden folders, but it will just do it in a fashion of ls, like the normal ls. So let me see if there's any in here. Yeah, so if we see, I just did ls dash a, and then there's a bunch of folders that weren't there when I'll do the normal ls. So yeah, I ran the normal ls, and there's a bunch of folders right here. But there's nothing with a dot. If I run ls-a, then it shows every single folder that I have, even the ones with a dot. These are a lot of configuration folders, so they're not too important. But yeah, both will work. ls-la will just show you a little bit more detail on every single folder. But yeah, this is basically just the gist of what I wanted to go over with file navigation. Before we move on, there anything that anyone was confused on throughout this, don't be afraid to speak up or just send me a direct message. Just want to make sure you guys kind of know how the terminal works, because terminal is just where you can execute a lot of your files, or for our case, run npm start. And in order to do so, you kind of need to know where it's at, where you need to be. Yeah. Okay, so now moving back to React, I talked about briefly, basically React is really helpful because of the fact that it has components. So like I was saying, this app component is a component, but it's just used to kind of show our entire page, and it's just going to be rendered in the index.js. However, you can also use other components, and it's highly recommended that you use other components just for the sake of modularity. So pretty much, you should try to make these reusable components. And with every component, you're going to want to have a separate .js folder and a separate .css folder for each one. So in our base example, we have the app.js folder or file, and then the app.css file. Now, this is just for our app component. However, I've also made some more components that I'll show you today. And if we see here, I have 3 components. So I have 3 more .js files. And then I have only 2 .css files, but it's because a couple of them share the same CSS. That's not to be worried about. But yeah, we'll be going through these in a minute. But just important to note, you should have a file for each component and a file for each CSS that you want to have, or each component's CSS. Okay, yeah. So let's say that I have a really kind of common, what's the right word? I'm using a card. I just made a little tiny card, and I want to display it 5 times. If we were in ordinary HTML, then I would just have to kind of take this code, copy and paste it a bunch of times, and then it just kind of makes the code really unreadable. You don't exactly know what you're looking at, and it just adds a lot of things that you don't necessarily need. Does this make sense? How if we have this, we would normally just copy paste it? Everybody understand? Okay. So this is if we're using no subcomponents. However, you can use components in React in order to kind of compartmentalize your website. It's similar to if you have coded before. Like I was saying, if you've coded before, you'll know that making a function is really recommended a lot of the time, just because instead of having to do the 10 lines of code that your function performs and include it every time in your main section, you can basically just have the function declaration, write it once, and then you can just call the function, which will be 1 line. It's kind of similar to that, but you're just using a component instead of having to rewrite HTML over and over again. So I'm going to go back to my app, and we can see here when I comment this out again. All right. So this is what I was saying. So I have 5 cards, and I'm going to, oh, I guess we're already compiled. Where am I at? I don't know. Okay, yeah. So basically, I just copy and pasted my HTML code. It works just fine. If you want to do this, go ahead. But you're just not taking the full advantage of what React can do. So basically, I just have a grid layout container, and this is going to go all the way down, and it's wrapping around my my whole pretty much app. And I'll go to the app.css just to show you guys what this looks like. Basically, this grid layout is just to kind of contain all of the cards. I'll show you what it looks like here. And in order to make 5 columns, I use this grid template columns. And I have the display set at grid, and you can set a custom gap, even though it kind of auto makes the gap for you when using grid template columns. I don't expect you guys to memorize this. Like, there's so much stuff in CSS. I get it. But I just kind of want to show you what my process was. And so, yeah, so that's going to be our div right here. And then we have our card. So the card, this is just going to be the container for the card. I kind of went a little, yeah, so this is going to be the card itself. So this is just talking about the actual outskirts of the card, this full moving piece right here. Yeah. And then I have another div inside of it for the card content. So if I just go and inspect this, one second. All right. Yeah, so if I inspect this div right here is just my card div. And then inside of that, I have my card content, and that's just holding like the actual content that I'm writing in that card. I just used this outside div, which is called the card, to actually make the box. And then inside is what holds the real content. Okay. So yeah, basically when I made this, I just copy pasted it 5 times. No worries, works just fine. However, there is a better and neater way that you can do this by making another component. So when I made the other component, I literally just took one of these cards. So, copy pasted this right here, put this, and just went to my floating card component. All right. So then this is the exact same code. Oops. Let me do that. But it's just one time. Now I can use this component inside of my app component. So I have, first of all, this kind of backtracking again. If you noticed in your app component or your app.js, you probably would have seen import, where is it? Import dot slash app.css. Now, if we use the logic that we just learned in the file systems, we'll see that, okay, I am in app.js. Now I want to access things from app.css, which is in the same folder as I am. So these are both located inside of the src, also known as the source folder. Pretty much the dot slash app.css just means the current folder that we're in right now slash app.css. So anything that says dot slash just means my current folder and then slash, and then you can access anything that's in the current folder that you are in. So since app.js is located in source, doing dot slash app.css means that we are going to access app.css. And that's important because we want to get all the information from it. So if you ever want to get information from a file, then you have to use the import statement, which we'll go over a little later. But that's going to be really important when we're using a component. So first of all, in our component, we wanted to import the styling for it, so the CSS file. So in order to do that, I made a floating card CSS file. Now, this just contains everything that I wanted to do inside of my floating card. And basically, we had to import it. So we used the logic that we have from the file system in order to get there, to get to our correct file and make sure that everything in that CSS file right here was able to get into our floating card.js file. So if we look, I'm in floating card.js right now, and I am located in the components folder. Now, the floating card.css is not inside of this folder. So we are going to go out of the folder into our parent folder, right? And that is going to be src, okay? So dot dot would take us from the components folder to the src folder. Does this make sense? Okay. And like I said, don't be afraid to ask questions. I'll try to answer it in chat when I can. I'm just seeing one in the chat. If we want to customize each card and separate it, what would be the best way to do that? And I will actually be touching upon that in a little bit later inside of this lesson. So we'll get to that if you want to be able to customize each card to have its own features. But yeah, so getting back to this, if we're trying to import the floating card.css file, we have to go from our components folder out to the source folder, right? Because it's located inside of another folder within source. So we go dot dot, which takes us back to src. and then we do slash styles, because styles is located within src. It's kind of like if you want to think about it like this, it's like a sibling folder to components. So they all have the same parent. So you have to go back to the parent and then to its sibling. So styles is a sibling folder of components. So you do // styles. And then because floating card.css is located within styles, we do back in our floating card.js, we do styles / floating card.css. Any problems in understanding how I got there? Perfect. Okay. So yeah, now back to the actual component itself. So I want to make a component. I have my HTML code in here for one card, and I want to use it in my app.js file. Basically, you got to make sure that you do this export default floating card. This is like a big problem that I had in, I'm sure you guys will take CS35L if you're a computer science major, but I ran into this and I was stuck on it for so long because I made a component. I'm wondering, why does this not work? It's because I didn't have this export default floating card. It doesn't actually export it as a component. Otherwise, you can also just make JavaScript functions that don't return HTML and don't need to be exported as a component. Now going back to our app folder, we have to import a floating card from the correct folder. So and then we kind of I'm not going to trace all the steps, but this code is all uploaded. So if you want to go through and do it yourself to see the path in order to get to floating card, then by all means go ahead. But I'm just using the same logic that I used in order to get to the CSS file, to get to the JS file when I'm in my app.js. And yeah, feel free to, if this is confusing, feel free to ask questions. I have no problem going over it. But yeah, basically you run import floating card from, and then /components / floating card. It's interesting because with .js files, you actually don't need to include the .js at the end. You can just include only the name of the component and it works just fine. Okay, so now going down here, we had our copy and pasted HTML code, and that looks like this. It works just fine. However, I don't want to do that. I want to use my new component that I just made. So yeah, now I'm using the same grid layout. So this is the same div. However, we can just use our component name almost like an HTML tag, which makes this really cool because we can just look in our floating card JS file to see what the HTML code is for it. But in our app, we literally just have 6 lines of code, or this should be 5 if I state, yeah, so this should be 5. We have 5 lines of code, which is shrunk down from about 30 or something like that in our app. So it makes it way more readable. And also you just know what this is. Like if you're looking in a document, because a lot of times you're working in a team environment and I see floating card, I'm going to know, hey, this is a floating card. I know what I'm looking at. When if you didn't, you'd have to go through each thing, kind of know, oh, this div corresponds to this card, like that type of thing. So it just makes it a lot easier. And then if we go back, so I saved, and it's the exact same thing. So this is just taking advantage of using subcomponents. Is there any questions on how I got here? Do we feel confident that we could do this ourselves? Anyone has any mixed feelings? All right. There's no specific questions. I'll move on. And oh yeah, so another really cool way that you can do this is by making a function to actually display your cards. Now this is really cool because it shrinks it down even more. So basically, if I can make a function, okay, I do want to specify this. When I'm using React, there is components. So like our app is a component, right? We export this app, it returns some sort of HTML code, but there's also just normal JavaScript functions, which just behave a little bit more like normal function that you see in like a C++ or a Python, something like that. So all these normal JavaScript functions are really just have a purpose to do something. They're not actually displaying the HTML code themselves. However, you can still incorporate this in your JavaScript like I'm doing here. So pretty much, I'm making a normal JavaScript function that just takes in a bunch of cards, and then so it takes in a bunch of cards, like you supply a number, and then it creates an array, and this is done by using const cards equals then the empty brackets. I'm not going to be able to go over all the JavaScript syntax. There's definitely going to be something that you can learn on your own, but I'll try to do the best I can. So yeah, const cards equals the empty array. Now we can say, we can do a for loop by saying, basically, what a for loop does is we say let I equal 0. And then in this case, our I is going to be like a counter type of thing. And then you use a semicolon, and this keeps on counting, this keeps on updating until this condition fails. So if I is less than num, then we keep going. So I'll show you the exact flow of how it works. So if we get this num passed in, let's say it's 5, right? Then we'd start out, we'd say, okay, I is equal to 0. Perfect, we're starting there. Now we got to check, is I less than 5? I will get to that in a second, Neil. But pretty much the gist is you don't really need to use semicolons. It's not like a requirement of the syntax. It is definitely better practice to use it. So use it. You didn't hear it from me not to use it, but it's not required in JavaScript. Yeah, back to what I was saying. The let I equal 0 just starts off our I at 0. And then from now on, we're just going to check that our I is still less than this number. So if our number is 5, it starts off at 0. 0 is less than 5. So then we execute this statement. And then after we've executed all the statements in our for loop, we then update it. So I'm saying I plus equals 1, which just means I like increment I by 1. So I is now 1 after one iteration. And then we go again, we it's a loop. So you keep going. So now I is equal to 1. We check, is I less than 5? Yes, it is. So we execute this code. And then after we're done executing this code, then we update it and we increment it by 1. So now I is equal to 2. Do the same thing. Is 2 less than 5? Hopefully you guys get the gist. If you don't, I can answer questions. No worries. But yeah, so we take in this number. Basically, you can, if we take in this number, you can push a floating card onto it, which is really interesting because you can literally put a component into an array. So we're going to have an array of components, and then you can return that array as like some sort of HTML. So I'll do that in this next segment here when I call the function. So pretty much, if we're doing a div with a grid layout, like I was saying, I can call this print cards function. If we want to call a function that displays some HTML, we can do it. I'm going to zoom in actually, just so you guys can see, by using the squiggly brackets. So this is just how you're going to actually evaluate a function. So like, if I want to print cards, you got to put it inside of these squiggly brackets for it to print cards. There's a lot of weird syntax, but yeah, basically this is how you would call it. So then this pretty much just does the same thing as this, but it does it 20 times and it does it in one line of code, which is really cool to have in a function because it just gets really repetitive. And this totally just makes sense. If you're reading someone else's code and you see the function print cards 20, you can kind of assume, oh, okay, this is printing 20 cards. You don't have to go through and count, oh, how many cards are there, blah, blah, blah. It's really self-explanatory. So it's definitely a good idea to get in the habit of using functions. within your components, because that's just kind of how you're going to be able to make a, dynamic website when we get there, but just be a smart coder. That's what I'd say. So yeah, if we look, now we have 20 card components. If we go through, and I see that we have a hand raised. Go ahead, Kat.
Hi, so in the previous slide, not the slide, the code, it returns an array, right? So
Yeah.
this array contains an object or a component or anything?
Yeah, so basically, sorry, I did not specify this at all. The cards dot push, it pretty much we have an array of cards, and in the cards dot push, it just allows it to, like, you can put a component onto the array. So like I showed previously, if you just wanted to, like, show a component in normal HTML, you write it just like any other HTML element. So floating card is our component. You put the tags around it, and then you just put it in between some divs, and that's how you display it. But a really cool feature about React is that you can actually make an array of components and then just pretty much return that array, and then that array will be evaluated as if it was just a bunch of components one after another. So like this literally just evaluates as 20 floating cards stacked on top of each other. So you can do that. It's just like a feature of React. Did that answer your question?
Does that mean that you don't need to make another variable when you call it to store it? So it's just like it kind of functions like void, but like it prints out everything. Ready?
Yeah. So it prints out everything pretty much. So that nothing's going to be stored. It's just like you're calling it there, and it's returning all the cards in that function. That's a great way of putting it. It's
That
like,
makes sense.
yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Kat was saying, this is kind of similar to if you were in a void function in another programming language, but you just ran like a print statement like cout or something like that, or print in Python. So you're not actually like returning a value to a variable. You're just kind of outputting it like that. And then when you call this, it will be output because it's just returned, I guess is the right way of saying it. I don't know if I'm confusing myself. Yeah, and then also I have a question here. If the cards is declared constant, how does it modify the size? Because push adds elements. So I'm not 1,000% sure on this. I'm pretty sure, but I think with a const, you just can't reassign it. So like if I have an array of cards, I couldn't later reassign it with a different value of cards. So I couldn't just then after go like cards equals like hello, something like that, because it's a constant. But you can still push onto the array. So it's not like the whole array has to stay exactly the same. So I'm pretty sure that's how it works. I would probably double check. But yeah, that's at least my understanding.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then sorry, I just have another question I'm reading. Yeah, so we just had a little bit confusion about the whole components folder and including the file, using the import statement to include the file, I believe. So this is just a kind of styling thing that we do in React. So like we showed in our previous lesson, basically when you have your app component, you aren't going to include any other files other than maybe some images or some like your app.css, which was already done for you. However, you're most likely going to have some other subcomponents like I have here, and so basically these subcomponents are, it's good practice to just have them in a folder. A lot of just CS is just going to be being organized. So yeah, this is something I created myself along with the styles folder. We just do this purely for organization. But then this just goes for anything in coding. If you want to include a file's contents, so for example, I have made this component if I want to include this component in my app, I'm going to have to import something from its file because we like this app file doesn't automatically take in another file. So we just have to do that by using the import statement. And then yeah, it's just like I said, it's just purely good practice to stay kind of separated. So this is the only reason why we make other files for other components. If you wanted to, you could just put it all on the same page and just have a bunch of clutter. But it's just really good to have kind of like organization in code because even with this isn't even a big project, and we can just see how clustered it's getting. So it's really good to try to stay as organized as possible. So that's just why we make different files for first of all our components, and then second of all our styles. And if you want to use other files that aren't yours, you're gonna have to do some sort of import statement to get them. I know we kind of went over a lot. Does anyone have any questions about how making a component works? How actually using the component in our app file works? The function that I just did about with using an array. Anyone have any questions about this? Okay, cool. So it looks like I don't have anything. It looks like right now is going to be a good time to take a 10-minute break. So I will resume at about 8 o'clock. And yeah, I'm going to use the restroom, but feel free to ask me any questions. I'll let you guys know when I'm back. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Is Bootstrap another thing you need to install, or that comes with React?
No, so I'm pretty sure Bootstrap is used for CSS. To be honest, I don't have a lot of experience with it.
Oh, okay.
But I do know of I have a friend in my 35L class that used Bootstrap. It's not just CSS actually, but I forget exactly because I haven't actually used it, but I can definitely look that up and get back to you on it. Because
It
it
looks
definitely is
alright.
a useful tool.
I was just asking. Yeah, I was just wondering, just
Yeah,
so
for sure.
understanding it. Thanks, man.
No, good question. I'll definitely include that. Okay, yeah. So getting back to it, use state is pretty much it's known as a hook. And this is kind of what is also one of those things that React is known for. So it's called a state just because it holds a state. So like it's kind of like a variable in normal coding. But the thing with JavaScript and HTML that's so unique is that the code is kind of constantly being called, almost constantly being rendered. So it kind of brings up that topic of, oh, what happens if I don't want something to happen a million times a second? Because that's how your page is being rendered pretty much. Like, when you save it, it renders it again. So your code is just kind of constantly being rendered over and over again. Or I guess rendered is not the right word, but it'll make sense. It'll make sense. Yeah. So the syntax for it is you const, and then you have the square brackets, and then on the left side is the state name. This is just kind of the name. This is the name of the state variable that you want to use. So this could be something as simple as I want to keep track of how many times a button has been clicked. And so this is one of the examples that I'll show you guys. But on the left side, you can just have it as count, and then on the right side, it's convention to have the function as set count. So like I showed here, the set state is just the function that is used to update the variable state. So it doesn't have to be a number necessarily. This could be like a true or false, something like that. It's typically used for those two things, kind of like a number value or sometimes a string, which is just like a word or something like that in between quotes. But this is just how you would use it. To initialize it, you have the equal sign, which is the assignment operator, and then you just have use state, and then in the parentheses you have the initial value. So if I have a number that I want to set it to, for example, I could run set state, which would set state name, which is the left side, to equal 2. And then the initial value is just the initial value stored in the variable upon the page getting rendered. So this is when you run npm start, or you run, or like, if I run refresh or something like that, this is just the initial value that gets stored in it. And yeah, so use state re-renders your component automatically upon the variable's state changing. So like, let's say I want to display the value of count constantly on my screen. With a normal JavaScript variable, it wouldn't be able to do this. It would basically just say, oh, we're going to look at the value when it was rendered. But if you're updating it while the page is up, we're not going to be able to see that. However, with this, if I want to click a button on my screen and have it interact and say, hey, show the actual current value of my count, you can do it using use state. And I will go over an example right here. So I'm going to get rid of this. And we can see at the top, I first of all declared it. So I have a const, and then we use our square brackets. I'll zoom in. We use our square brackets, and we say count, comma, set count. Now, can someone tell me what would happen if I ran the code? If I ran this code? Perfect. Yeah. So I'm getting a couple things in the chat. Most people are saying this, and that is perfectly correct. Basically, if I was going to do something, this would just set the count to equal 4. However, I'll show you guys the example first. A lot of the times, this use state is used to kind of react to some action. So, like, for example, if you push a button and you want the state to be rendered to true or set to true, you'd use a use state in order to accomplish that. So let me see. I have made another component actually, especially for this. And this also kind of includes our, one of the previous questions was if you wanted to customize a card. If you guys remember when I was talking about that, if you have a card and I want to put custom data into the card, I don't want them all to say the same thing. I want to be able to pass in my own values into each individual card. Basically, you can do that by passing in props or properties. It's easier to call them parameters to your component. So I've made a component called increment button, and I'll show you guys that one first because it might make a bit more sense. But pretty much the point of this increment button, as I'll show you guys here, is just when I click it, the count goes up. So this is done by using use state. So every time that I refresh the page, it goes to 0. And then every time I click the button, it counts up. And if I was to use a normal JavaScript variable, this would not work. It only works with use state because it can actually re-render your page upon the state changing. This is really nice to make a dynamic website. And yeah, so basically I just use this function in order to do it. But one thing you might notice is that I don't have my use state declared in this function. So you're thinking like, oh, how does the value get stored? Like, how do we know, or how does it know what it's manipulating? How does it know what to do? You can do this by passing in, first of all, the data, and then second of all, you can pass in a function actually, which is really cool, because basically in my actual app component, right, the normal app component that I have, I have declared this count as a use state or a state variable, right? So then our increment button ordinarily wouldn't know anything about our app's count value. So I have made this function called increment count, and this is inside of my app component. And this almost makes apps or components comparable to classes in object-oriented languages, if you can use state, because it's almost like it has a class variable. It has something that it can be manipulated from the outside. And so pretty much we give this increment count function, which just says set count plus one. So this is just saying whatever the count value was, it now equals itself plus one. This is how you increment a counter by using use state. And then I want to return some HTML code, which includes my increment button. Now, if we go back to my increment button, or actually before I go back, does everybody understand how the use state kind of works, how it's being rendered whenever the value changes, all that jazz? No confusion? Okay, cool. So now I have my increment button component. So if I go over to components and then increment button, basically a component can have parameters that are passed into it, right? So my app component, it doesn't have anything passed into it. So when we call app, or yeah, I'll slow down a second. So my app component, in these parentheses right here, there is no parameters that are inside it. So there's nothing that it's fed and it has to manipulate data on it or anything like that. It just runs. And this is the same for my floating card example. However, we can also pass in parameters, and we do that usually for convention by using the word props. And basically, the props is just like a set. It means a set of parameters that's kind of undefined. I guess like it can be of any size, so like you can pass in 10 parameters. However, the actual parameters are defined inside of the function itself. The only reason why props is used is just to let you know that this is an interactive component and that you need to supply it with parameters. It's purely out of convention, as we see a lot of things in coding are. But yeah, it's just for other developers to let them know that you're using parameters. And then your actual parameters are stored inside of your function by doing this. You're making a set with count, comma, increment function, and basically props will just hold those two values. So it says, okay, I have a set that holds a count. I'm going to assign my value of count into increment button's value of count, and I'm going to assign my function that I was given into increment function's value, or increment button's increment function variable. So now in my increment button itself, we have a function that we can do. So a button has an on click parameter. It's just one of the default things. And like I said, when you want to have a function or you want to evaluate something, you can use the curly brackets. So the curly brackets are pretty much evaluating something. So we're evaluating this function. I think that's the best way of saying it. I'm not 100% confident on every single case of this, but pretty much on click, it's going to call the increment function that gets passed into it. So if I change this increment function, which I passed into it, to count plus 2, let's say, then it would take my app's increment function. So if I refresh and then do it, it counts in 2s now. So it's just taking a function from my app component that's calling it. And that is done by when you're declaring you're declaring your component in HTML, or when you're returning your HTML. Basically you just like kind of using class name equals something, you just do that with the parameter name. So in this, we have count and increment function. So in your app, you would just say count equals something, and then increment function equals something. And now this component is rendered with that data in that function. So going back to the original question that we had was how can we, make custom cards? If you just had it where your card displayed some sort of data that it's fed, then you could just completely put in your own custom card for each one. So that's how you do it. You'd feed it in by using parameters. I forget who asked that, but I hope that clarified your question. All right. So anything, I think we're gonna move on from use state. Does everyone kind of get the gist of how it works? Do we feel confident that we could use it, at least test it out on our own? It's okay if not. I take no offense to it. All right. So yeah, just testing knowledge. If I wanted to have a function that says increment count by 1, what would go in the blank? And you can just send me this in the chat, say it out loud, whatever you want. Haven't gotten that many messages yet, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit to think about it. All right, so we got a couple answers. So someone said they already forgot. No worries, we can go back. So I just want to go over one of the answers that I got, which was use state plus plus. So I just want to reiterate, the use state is purely for starting out and declaring it as a use state variable. So our actual variable is going to be count right here. So if we go back to our example, we have up here, all this is doing is saying, I have a count variable, and then and then if I want to manipulate this count variable, I use this function, which is called set count. And then it's initialized to a use state value of 0. So if you want to update the function, or if you want to update the value of count, you have to use the corresponding function that you gave you, which is just by convention usually named set blank. So if I had another variable, which I wanted to say, I don't know, call it blue or something like that, completely random, you would just use set blue, which is the function that corresponds to setting the value of blue, and then use state just initializes its value upon rendering. So if I want it to be initialized to true, then I do this. You could also initialize it to null, which kind of gives you some freedom on what to set it to. Null basically just means there's nothing. It's not even a 0. It's a very specific thing to just specify there's literally nothing there. It's not even declared at all. So yeah, if you want to update your value, you just have to use the function that you made in order to update it. So then because of that, the answer to this would be, oh shoot, I guess I didn't even put the answer, but I'll just write it here. The answer to that would be set count plus 1. Oops, count plus 1. So yeah, if you wanted to increment a use state variable, you would do set count plus 1. This is just the syntax for use state. A normal variable, you could easily do something like count plus equals 1 or count plus plus, something like that. But it's just only because this is a use state variable, you have to do it in that manner. Sorry, I'm just getting a couple of questions in the chat. I'm gonna read them out. Does that mean we can only change the value with the function we set there? So are you by this, do you mean this function right here, or are you saying the set count function? Okay, yeah, so the set count function is the only way that you can change the value of your count variable, your count state variable. The reason why it's just so finicky is because when they designed use state, they just only made one way so that it actively re-renders your page with the correct value. So if I wanted to do it with a normal JavaScript variable, then pretty much, oops. Yeah. If I wanted to do it with a normal JavaScript variable, and then I just had my increment count function, just say count plus plus or something like that, then this would not change when I click the button. It would stay at 0 because it doesn't re-render the page when I would run the increment count function. Quinn, when you're saying is set count defined somewhere, do you mean like the actual source code for set count, or sorry, I'm just not fully understanding the question.
Yeah, like did you write a function set count that's somewhere else in your code, or is that just assumed to mean it's like a function that's going to modify that variable count?
Yeah, great question. So the way that use state works is that it already knows the second parameter that you feed in the square brackets is just going to be the function for updating the first parameter in between these brackets. So
Okay.
React does this. I have no clue what the source code looks like. It's just something that you could take advantage of. But this only happens if you assign it with the use state and then some, or and then parentheses some initial value. And like I was saying, you could do this to a bunch of things. I could do it to 20. So then when I re-render this page, it's 20, or it wouldn't work for false because we're doing a number. So something would, yeah, it doesn't work. But yeah. So the whatever the second thing is, it's the best convention to name it set count. That's how you would update the value, and that's the only way you can do it. That
Okay.
makes
And
sense?
does it get kind of like complicated with the operations within set count, or is it just like basic arithmetic operations generally, or like Boolean?
So like I guess yeah, like the only a lot of the times a lot of times you'll use it aren't necessarily for these crazy functions, I guess. Like a lot of times I have used it, it's for like a true or false or something like that. So a lot of the times when you're coding, you want to have these things called flags. So the flags are basically just like a way to keep track of what is true in your code while it's running, I guess is the best way of putting it. So then like if upon some event you want to say, oh, you know, like let's say I have a video game and I want to and I'm coding it and I want to be able to recognize when my uh health is below 20% or something like that, and I want to update something else on my screen. Basically, you could have some sort of function that says if health is less than 20, set dying true. So then it would, and then based off that fact, you can do something else. So you kind of, a lot of times it's just used to kind of keep track of things, but just live. I don't know if I explained that well or not.
Yeah,
Did
no,
that
that
answer
makes
your
sense.
question
Like
at all?
flag controlled, like wild loops kind of situation.
Yeah, like just things like that. Because I mean, your page is constantly being um, updated, so it's just always good to like with use state. It just allows you to kind of update it based on certain factors. I guess is the right way of saying it. Like you can interact with it dynamically. It's not just going to show a static web page.
I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know this stuff's confusing. Believe me. Um, and then okay, so I'm getting a couple more questions. Um, Yeah, so I'm getting, could you explain when the page is rendered again? So pretty much the I explained it wrong. So it's not that the page is getting rendered every second, like I was saying. It's just that's not the right way of putting it. It's just it gets when it gets rendered, it means like, oh, the page is changing. Like we're going to update the page with its current values. So you do this happens upon a refresh. This happens upon you saving it. Um, this happens upon you running npm start, just any time where the page is updated to have its current value. So then basically with a use state, whenever the state of the variable is changed, the page re-renders. So now the page itself is updated with your current values that are in your code. So when I press this click me and it increments my count by 2, this just means that my page will re-render when the use state variable is changed. Does that answer the question in the chat? Are we feeling confident about this? Still confusing?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so then I also had another question. It kind of just works as a default constructor when talking about the set count. And yeah, this is a great way to look at it, because basically the set count is just automatically given to you, and it's just a way of saying here's how you set the variable. It's like if someone else wrote a class for you. If you've coded before, it's like if someone else wrote a class for you and it's a private class, and you have some sort of private variable. It's kind of like that. You have to run the setter method in order to actually set it to its value, and it's just given to you by default. The page is rendered, I think your browser is just essentially translating your HTML, JS, and CSS to a visual format everyone can understand. Yes, sounds good, and then everything gets restored to default. Yeah, so pretty much when you're actually like rendering your page, so like refreshing your page, it'll set everything to default values. However, use state makes it so if your use state is updated before like a refresh or a save, then the page still displays with that updated value. So you can change values before, like, on your actual web page instead of having to do it in the code itself. I think is the best way of putting it. So it just makes it really interactive. And I can show a example of this later. But I think, okay, we have one question. Kat, you can go ahead.
Oh, so if you don't want to re-render it every time the state got updated, is there any way that you do it manually? Let's say you click the button 5 times and that's when it shows that it incremented by 5. Like it accumulates everything, but not redrawing everything every time it gets updated.
So you're saying like if you only wanted to re-render it on the 5th click, is that what you
Yes.
mean? I'm actually not sure, because I know with the use state, it's just whenever it gets yeah, I'm actually not sure on that. I can definitely look into it. But I haven't done anything like that before, so I really couldn't answer your question. Sorry.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, anything else before we move on? Do we need any more clarifications on use state? Okay, cool. Yeah, just to recap, set count, or just whatever you name this second the second parameter, is just the function that updates your count, or whatever you want to name it. So yeah, as long as you use this use state and then an initial value, and remember to import use state in the top of your code by using the import statement. Okay. So yeah, we already went over the passing data or functions into a component. Any questions about this? I guess, is there anything that could make me or that make you guys feel more confident to do this yourself? Okay. All right, moving on to the next thing. So another hook that we have is called use effect. So pretty much when with use effect, the whole idea is that the function within the use effect clause is updated, or the function is called whenever the value at the end of the use effect is updated. So this will make more sense when I go in depth. But basically, for this example here, we're calling a use effect, and then this is called an arrow function. So we see how there's the parentheses right here, and then we have an arrow, so just equals, and then a little greater than sign, and then a normal function. So this is what's called an arrow function. It's only really used in JavaScript. It's just kind of the syntax for use effect, because basically the syntax for use effect is just you call it use effect, and then you have some sort of function, and then a comma. So that's your first parameter. And then you're going to have an array of dependencies, is what they're called. So the whole idea is that if any of these dependencies are called, then this function is also called, or any of these dependencies are changed, this function is also called. So if I have this variable, like we were talking about, count, and count changes, I want something to happen when count changes. So you do that by using a use effect. So right here, we see count, and then I'll go into my actual example. But then this function, this arrow function, is called if count is changed. And once again, this is part of building a dynamic website, because basically it's just saying like you don't want, or you want to do some action every time that this changes. So it's a little bit different than use state, because use state just kind of re-renders the page with the correct values, but it doesn't actually call a specific function. So it wouldn't actually do something else other than re-rendering. Use effect also re-renders, but it also can perform a function. So I will jump into an example that I coded, I'll jump into the example, and then I'll have you guys ask some questions after if need be. Okay, so I have made this component called document title. So it's very, very similar to the one that I just had, with the updated count. However, it does a little bit more when we update the count. So let me just make sure that this is compiled all correctly. Perfect. So this one's doesn't look as nice. I didn't put as much effort into this one. But pretty much whenever I increment the count, so I'm going to increment the count. I don't know if you guys can see at the top of the document right here. Oops. At the top of the document right here, the title of our document holds our updated value. So if I press increment, the title of our document will change. This is done using a use effect, because pretty much here's the flow of how everything happened. In our document title, it's the same as our previous one. We're saying that on click of the button, we want to set our count equal to count plus 1. So it's just incrementing our count. However, there's one more thing that happens. It doesn't just show the count right here. It also changes the document title. And that's done by using a use effect, because every time that the count value changes, then this function is called. So we're saying the document.title, which is just kind of a keyword of HTML or JavaScript, equals, and then this string right here. And I don't know if you guys can see, it's very, very subtle. These little quotes right here, they are not actual quotes. They are the backtick that's going to be on like the top left of your keyboard. And these are very important because they can be used to evaluate some sort of variable. So like right here, you may be wondering, oh, how did I get the number 7 into the top of my document? It's because we're using these backticks. It basically just, when you use this syntax, the $, and then the squiggly lines, or the squiggly brackets, and then your variable inside, it pretty much just evaluates that variable, and then it can be used within a string. So if I want to do this with, I couldn't just go like, normal quotes, because it just think that it's all part of it. And so my title would just include the $ and the curly brackets and everything like that. So that's just, I wanted to comment on that because I know you're probably looking at the code and being like, oh, how does that work? But yeah, back to the use effect. Does everybody understand the concept of the use effect? Is there anything confusing about what I just said? Do you feel like you could do something by using a use effect? I think a lot of this is going to be syntax problems too. And like I've said earlier, the AI and AI and just the web in general are great for helping those problems because I don't want you guys to not be doing this stuff because you don't conceptually understand it, or I don't want you guys to have to struggle because you conceptually understand it, but you don't get the syntax. I want you guys to be able to conceptually understand it and get the syntax, but the syntax can just be really confusing sometimes. So don't be afraid to use some sort of AI to help you with it. Okay, so I have some questions in the chat. First of all, what is the biggest difference between use effect and use state? So basically, when you have a use state, yes, it re-renders the page. So like, for example, I'll go back to my old example with just the basic use effect. Okay. Okay, so this re-renders the page every time that I click because it has to update the values. However, there's no real function being called because my state, my count changes, right? The count does change and that it's up and it's updated on the actual page itself, but there's no function that is being called as a result of that. So the thing with use effect is it says, okay, count has changed. Because count has changed, I am now going to call this function. That's how I describe it. Is that a sufficient enough explanation? Okay. So then I also have the question. So use effect is like an if then statement. It's not necessarily like an if then statement because it's basically a reaction. So a use effect is just a reaction. It's saying when this changes, when this certain value changes. So in my code, I'll go back to the other example. When the value of count changes. So if I go back to document title, it's saying when the value of count changes, I'm going to call this function that I have highlighted right here. So it just basically just reacts to whenever the value of count changes. Does this make sense? And then use state, it can change the value of count. However, it doesn't actually call a function on top of that. It calls the set count function in order to change it, but it doesn't actually react to its value being changed. That's how I describe it. So I also another question right here. It said, so if I did use state 5, then count will be 5 after reset, right? So you're not going to run use state 5 or yes. Sorry, that is completely correct. Basically, if you did use state 5, like in my in this example, let's say, if I did use state 5 and then I increment it a bunch, whatever. If I was to refresh it, then it'd go back to 5. So it goes back to that default value. That's a great question. It doesn't go back to like 0 or false or something like that. It goes back to whatever value you set it at. And that's only upon a refresh or if you saved the file. If not, then it'll just re-render the page, but it won't actually refresh the page. It'll re-render the page with the correct value. Okay, and then another one. When calling document title, it automatically knows to use the use effect. Like you don't specifically have to call use effect. So it's a little bit different than that. So it's saying that the use effect is saying that when this count changes, then I am going to when the count changes, then pretty much I'm going to call this exact function. Now, what this function does is it sets the document title to this specific phrase. And yeah, so it's not like the document title, or yeah, it's not like it knows how to use the use effect. It's the use effect calls that specific statement. The document dot title equals count, and your JavaScript will already know what document dot title is. Document is actually a keyword, and then title is also a keyword, so it'll know what that is. That'll only be changed upon count changing. Does this make sense? Okay, perfect. And then I also got another one. What does the dollar sign do? So the annoying thing about just coding in React and like JavaScript and stuff like that is that there's a lot of subtle differences in a lot of things. So like, for example, in this, we are in our HTML, we are evaluating count by just having, the curly brackets count, right? And this works just fine when you're in HTML. However, up here, when we're in our JavaScript, if we want to evaluate a variable, we'd have to do the dollar sign and then the curly brackets inside of our tick, of our back ticks. So yeah, if we can see really subtly, it's not a normal quote, it's a back tick. That will actually allow you to kind of evaluate this. If we had a normal quote, like I said earlier, it'll just set the title to this exact phrase, and that's not what we want. So that's why we use the backticks. But yeah, like I said, I know I'm going to keep saying this. Definitely just use like AI to try to help you with your syntax problems, because I felt like that's the thing that has helped me the most, because I don't think that it's a problem if you don't understand the syntax, or you might have a little bit wrong understanding of the syntax. I think the most important thing is knowing conceptually what you're doing. So definitely just try to use that to help you fix your syntax, or use the web if you want. But I feel like AI just understands the best in terms of what your actual problems are. So how are we feeling about use effect? If you had to do something really simple, do you guys think you could? Anything else you want me to clarify? We got a little bit of time left. Okay. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to move on to a very specific subset of use effect, and that's for if you want to use the keyboard in order to be able to interact with your, you want to use the keyboard to interact with your web page. So I have a quick example that I will show you guys right now. And yeah, so let me just start that up real quick. And if you guys, are paying attention here, right now I'm in the example div folder. Because I'm in the example div folder and I want to get to the pointer folder, I have to go cd and then dot dot, so that goes up, and then slash pointer. Oh wait, no, I actually have to go one more dot dot and then into pointer, because we go out of example div into example code, and then we have to go out of example code into React, and then from React into pointer. So then this will get us in the correct directory. So now that I'm in pointer, okay. I'm in pointer. Okay. So I can run npm start. So this is an example of me using my keyboard. So these are just here for the display. They don't do anything actually. But basically this pointer can rotate left and right. So if I press my A key, then this thing's going to rotate to the left. And if I point my D key, then this thing's going to point to the right. Now, this is done using use effect. And I like, believe me, this is not a trivial thing. This is not really too easy, but it's definitely going to be important down the road. So now I got to just dive into the code with it. So basically, how this use effect works is, oh, I think this is a very important mention. So here is my use effect. Now, the use effect, basically, if we look into the dependencies, which I will shrink this down. If we look into the dependencies, it's an empty array. So there's no variable that it's depending on. So does anyone have any intuition on what this could mean? Even if it's a complete guess, anyone have any guesses on what having no dependencies would mean for a use effect? Okay, I'm getting a couple answers in here. Okay, yeah, so a lot of you guys are getting this right. Okay, yeah, so thank you guys for responding. A couple people were able to get it right. Basically, if it's a use effect, it means that this, and there's no dependencies, it means that this function right here, so we can see I'm using the same syntax, the use effect with the arrow function, and then comma, no dependencies. It means that it only renders once. So it only calls this function one time, and it's right when your page is rendered. So this function inside the arrow function will be called whenever the okay. So this will be called whenever the page is rendered. So like if you run npm start, or if you do a a reset on the page, that's the only time that it'll be called. So how it works with handling keys, I don't know if I have the best explanation for this, but pretty much you have to have a function, a normal function that handles when your key goes down, and then you have to have another function that handles when your key goes up. So this can be anything, but in my specific example, it just means that it just means that it takes in this event, which in our case is a key getting pressed, and then it checks what the key is that got pressed, and then does something based off that. Like I said, this can be very confusing at first. However, I think it's good to note. So yeah, I got a question here. So you can have multiple functions in one use effect. Yes, you can. So it's very confusing, I have to admit, with JavaScript. However, if you think about it, I've already shown you examples with functions being called that have functions inside of them. So if we, maybe look back at our it's just kind of how JavaScript is and React is. So if we look back in our basic example with the app, right? We have our app function. Yes, this is a component. However, it still is a function. This app inside of it has functions. So your components can have functions. So functions can have functions. If like it sounds super weird, but it's just part of how JavaScript runs. So yeah, your use effect can have multiple functions in it, and then pretty much now this is very specific code. So you guys are basically at some point you guys are going to have to use your keyboard to interact with your website. So you don't even have to fully understand it. Of course, I want you to, but this is like a very specific code for how handling a key works. So this is just really important to kind of note. Basically, in your use effect, you have to write. There's a couple things you have to take care of. You have to write functions that handle when the key goes down. So that handling the key goes down means handling what happens when A is pressed, handling what happens when D is pressed, that type of thing. So that's what goes inside your key down function. And then your key up function just means, oh, we want to reset something back to normal, or it does nothing. It doesn't have to do something, but in my example, it sets the rotation back to normal. So like if we see here, when I have the if event dot key, and keep in mind, these are all keywords that React and JavaScript already have. So I did not make the variable event. I did not make the variable key. These are just things that JavaScript already understands because it's needed in order to interact with your computer. So then we check a key has gone down. Basically, it checks what the key is with event.key, and it compares it to the character A. And I learned what character to use by using ChatGPT because I just didn't know the syntax for it. And then yeah, so then it sets the rotation to negative 90 degrees, or sorry, 45 degrees, or no, it should be 90 degrees. Yeah, so it sets it left. So I'm pressing A right now, and I added some CSS that makes a little nice transition, but basically it rotates the actual pointer to the left. And then I do the same thing for if the event key is D, and for the sake of time, oh yeah, so sorry, we got a real quick question. Is the triple equal sign just the double equal sign, but for JavaScript? Yes, if you've coded before, you've probably used the double equal sign for comparison. So in JavaScript, it's just a triple equal sign. It's just saying, hey, is the key equal to A? That's pretty much just what it's saying. And then you have the handle key up. And I'm sorry to say this, I got to kind of wrap this up just because we're running out of time. But I'll try to explain it the best I can. And yeah, so you have to have your handle key down function and your handle key up function within your use effect. And then also you have to add an event listener for key down and key up. Now, this is just so the first half pretty much of this statement is default JavaScript. I haven't done any of this. So window is a keyword in JavaScript, and you can add an event listener to the window. So basically just makes it so if something happens, which in this case it's key down, which is a very specific thing, which JavaScript has already made. It's not me that's making this function, it's JavaScript. Then you call this function. So that's how event listener works. It's saying that if this event happens and the event is key down, then you call this function. So this function I made myself, and that's what you have to make. You also have to add an event listener for key up. So your window will detect when a key is released and a key goes up. And then you have your handle key up function. Now, I can't fully explain this, but then in your return from the use effect function, which is right here, the arrow function, and we were talking about earlier, that's when you remove the event listener. So pretty much like when this function exits, then that's when those event listeners are removed. But yeah, is there any questions about kind of the process of adding an event listener to your window? Yeah, so this was just asked, why do we need the empty square brackets? So this is not needed, or this is just needed with a keyboard input because it's pretty much just saying when we render, we just want to bam, smack all this stuff onto the site. So pretty much if like when we render this page, it'll just run all of this code right here. So we'll just add an event listener, but we don't really need to run this code, run this function any other time than when the page is rendered. So that's why we used an empty dependency list. Does that make sense? It's just we don't want to call this function multiple times. We only want to call the function when the page is rendered. And yeah, so this can be used for multiple things. Like if you, let's say you're coding some sort of video game in JavaScript and you want to be able to, you know, make a character move around, right? So a lot of the times the use effect will be combined with use state to kind of affect some sort of position or, you know, change some sort of graphic. So you can do this by adding these event listeners in order to kind of, I don't know, manipulate your website without actually, like, while using keys and not just having to click around on your screen. And it can be very useful. And then, yeah, so I think unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap up. I wasn't able to fully finish this example, but I can definitely go through and kind of make another supplemental video and send it to you guys again, because I feel like, you know, it's really cool to be able to press a key on your website and be able to kind of have it interact with your page. So I feel like it's one of the most commonly used use effect. And so, yeah, I can definitely send another video and kind of like start from scratch and see how this could be used. And then I would like you guys to, I ran a little behind on time, but I would like you guys to be able to maybe make something yourself, and we can kind of do another check-in in, you know, the next week or so. I can set a deadline, but do something with with this use effect and key add event listener for keys. And yeah, so I'll make a video. We'll send out some announcements, but unfortunately, for the sake of time, we got to wrap it up right now.
So Ryan, looking forward, are you going to be asking for any submissions of anything?
Yeah, so I'm basically, I might look for a submission for this next or for the previous project, which is the personal website, and then the next one, which will be like handling keys and things like that, making some sort of interactive website with handling keys. However, I will send out some sort of email that specifies the details of how to submit it. So yeah, please keep working on your personal sites. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, but I just want you to be able to show us that you kind of understand the gist of basic HTML and just web development using React to make a static website. Like I said, doesn't have to be anything crazy. And then I will send out some more announcements with more specific details about maybe trying to get you guys to use the use effect and event listeners to make some sort of dynamic website. And I will publish information about that at a later date.
Okay, so we're going to make this interesting. And so I'm going to provide a $25 UCLA bookstore gift card that Ryan can award to the person who he feels produced. Well, I'll let Ryan decide what the criteria is going to be. And he'll communicate that with you when he's sharing how to submit it and when to do that by. Okay. But we want to make this a little fun, so we're gonna offer and award that $25 gift card. Okay. So Ryan, I wonder if maybe we can ask one of the students to kind of like, I always like at the end of a workshop to kind of recap what it is that we've learned. And so I want to see if there's a participant who might be brave enough to share back with us what you think that you were supposed to have learned over the last 2 days. Hopefully somebody will volunteer. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Ryan to choose somebody.
I can go.
I just hope you don't say nothing.
Yeah, come on, you guys. Don't make Ryan feel bad.
I can go.
All right. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah. Was it for just today or yesterday and today? Because I was taking a little notes.
Let's do
for
yesterday
today.
and today. Yeah.
Okay, so yesterday was kind of like an intro to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just like what goes into changing each part of a website, just like any website you'd see. So there's like divs that make up each individual part, and you can customize each div for like text or images. Yeah, that's just a summary of yesterday. And then for today, I was taking some notes. So the first part was using the command terminal. So we learned how to like move from parents to children to get to the file that you want the terminal to be in. And then I kind of skipped a lot of stuff, but yeah, so to what we were just talking about, hooks examples, we did use state. So use state is like how do I say this? So it's like you kind of have a variable and then you're setting it to something, and you have like an initial value for that variable. Use effect is another hook, which is a little different. It's like calling a function every time that that variable is changed. Yeah, and then I have a lot of specific stuff, but that's like just going over the concepts that we learned today.
Okay. What do you think, Ryan?
It was pretty good. I mean, of course, I don't expect you to, present the whole lesson. But yeah, you definitely got most of it.
Okay, how about a round of applause for Matthew? Thank you for sharing. I think, it's important for us to do this because, I think like, as you're moving forward, both as, in your development as an engineer, both from the context of being able to communicate with one another, but also your ability to speak to other engineers, other recruiters, we all have to learn how to be able to explain what it is that either we learned or what we did, right? And so it can be intimidating, the first few times when you're doing this, but like I want us to get into the practice of being able to say, right, to verbalize what it is that you've done, even what was hard about it, right, and how you figured it out, because all of that stuff, that persistence, that grit, I think like first of all, it's a key skill for engineering because we are about solving problems, right? But I think it's also an element of being able to connect with another engineer, or connect with a recruiter, because first of all, they need to understand what it is that your capabilities are. But I think everyone who has gone through this kind of stuff is going to be able to empathize with the hard, right? With the lessons learned, with, sometimes the failures that you've done. And so I think it's a really great skill to be able to talk about it. And for me, I shared this at our e-transfer 101 sessions, is that like, speaking publicly does not come naturally to me. And I'm honestly more of an introvert, right? And I've had to really work at being able to force myself to try. Okay. And so Matthew, thank you for taking the first leap to kind of explain out what it is that you did. And not to take anything away at all from our mentors, but like I feel like these experiences also are part of the reason why it's such a great professional development, right? Because these are things that you will have to do, right? And leading a lesson like this, it does take quite a bit of like preparation, right? Practice, foresight, right? So I also want to thank Ryan for leading us in these first two workshops, and I know we're gonna have some other great workshops from our other mentors. So how about a round of applause for Ryan? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We have a few announcements to make, and so I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and Aniket in a second, and then I do have an announcement that I have to share. But I also wanted to say, I wanted to ask actually everybody to sing, but I realized that if we do that on Zoom, only one person's voice is going to come through. But tonight is Ryan's birthday, and so happy birthday, Ryan!
Happy birthday!
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday, Ryan!
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
How old are you?
21.
Oh,
Oh,
he's
nice.
legal.
What are you still doing here, bro?
He's teaching class on his 21st birthday.
It's because I got you guys. I love you guys.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, Ryan, and for a wonderful job on your presentation and your lessons. Ashley and Aniket, do you want to make your announcement?
Yes, I can do that. Okay, so as you guys know, in the schedule, we have our first CADing workshop tomorrow, which means that you will have to have a couple of things already downloaded and it's not going when you enter the Zoom. So as you all know, we have given you the skills acquisition form in which we asked if you have Onshape or SolidWorks and your experience on both. The reason we did that is because we want to send out licenses, which we will be doing shortly after this Zoom meeting. So in the email that I'm going to send, you will have instructions to create an Onshape account, courtesy of Aniket, who created the slides. And then you will have directions on how to download, install, and activate. That sounds like a lot, it really isn't. SolidWorks on your computer, if your computer can run it. I have linked those slides in that email as well. I want to preface that I left my contact information within the slides in case you guys have any trouble so that I can answer. I recommend using my phone number because I will not answer emails. I'm just not on my computer like that. And on top of that, please download SolidWorks with time if your computer can support it. By that, I mean Mac users cannot use SolidWorks because it doesn't work. You can only run SolidWorks if you have a computer that runs Windows. So if you can run SolidWorks, please download SolidWorks with time. It takes a while and it might actually drain your computer's battery life because that's just the way SolidWorks is. So I recommend you have a power source near you. With Onshape, you should be fine. It's an online platform to CAD. There shouldn't be too many complications. I don't know if Annika wants to touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Onshape is a web-based platform, so you guys shouldn't have any problems with like downloading anything. It's all web-based. One thing that you guys will need is an edu email or access to an edu email. So like any email that has an edu extension. That's just to get an education account on Onshape. Instructions are on the slide, so if you guys need to refer to those, that's there for your disposal. As well as that, you guys can reach out to me for any questions that you have. Email works fine, whatever, to be honest. Whatever floats your boat.
So now that that's announcement's made, if you guys have any questions about that, and I can answer them really quickly, send them in the chat. I'll turn it over back to Wes.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to be clear again, guys. So please dedicate an hour tomorrow to download the software if you're downloading SolidWorks and to set up Onshape, because it could completely derail tomorrow night's workshop. Okay. That has happened before. And so, please try to spend some time doing that. Ashley and Aniket will get you the licenses again. To purchase this license as a professional is hundreds of dollars. And I think even the student license is like $100. So thank you to Ashley for hustling to get that for all of us. It is an industry standard, and so we're very excited to be teaching this to you. For those of you who are Mac users, don't worry, Onshape is pretty capable as well, right? And you'll be using that software, for those of you who are participating in Hack. Okay, so either will work, but everyone will get a SolidWorks license for your computer. So please spend some time, and if you're having trouble with that, please contact Ashley so that she can help you before class starts. Okay. My announcement tonight is about the Northrop. Oh, Ryan, can I grab the screen, please? Thank you. So as I mentioned at the start of all of this, shoot. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear
we
you.
can.
Are you able to see the slide?
No.
No, it's currently frozen, Wes.
My computer is frozen. Okay, let me just talk about it. So this is the first year that we've had an industry representative want to participate with us. It's been something that I've been working on for many, many years. And Northrop Grumman actually has identified one of 3 campuses that they're going to work with, particularly with trying to support the community college transfer pipeline and hiring interns who have, kind of traveled that pathway. Okay. Are you guys still hearing me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. mentors, if you end up not, can somebody text me? All right, so what all this is to say, and perhaps Ryan, maybe we need to stop recording, please.